little presentation of sorts to kick us off?
Well, since I didn't get to do it last time, I prefer that somebody else go first because I don't know what we're doing.
Okay. Well, in that case, let
Well,
us.
I can if you want me to, I guess.
Well, I think one of the fun things was to just say when we moved into Centerville, or if you went to any schools in Centerville, just gives a time frame. For example, my family moved here in 1972, and we first moved into the area that is Chalet Woods area, right off of Braddock, in the area of Centerville that's near Chantilly Country Club. So Bonnie, what about you? When did you first come to Centerville?
Okay, I moved to Centerville with my family in September of 1955. I was 3 years old. My family consisted of my dad, my mom, and my mom's sister, my Aunt Sally. We lived on a 10-acre farm. We purchased it from Mr. Hocker. The original house was 3 rooms. You walked into a small front porch, enclosed front porch. You walked into the living room. To the right was a bedroom, and to the left was the kitchen. When electricity came to Centerville, which I don't know when that was, Mr. Hawker added a bathroom and a bedroom to the back of the house behind the original bedroom. Plus, he put a basement under that portion of the house. And so it had a furnace and a freezer and a washer in the basement. You could only get to the basement from the back porch, however, so it was never heated in the wintertime and was always cold.
Where was this in Centerville, Bonnie?
Okay, I lived on North Braddock Road, very close to where you moved into Chalet Woods. We lived where Kettler and Scott's townhouse development is now, next to Orman Stone School.
You knew
Yes.
Mr. Cook.
Mr.
Did
Cook.
you know the Cooks?
He lived next door back the long road. When we moved in, I don't know who lived there when we first moved in, but Mrs. Baggs, who taught me in the 3rd grade, lived there most of my childhood. The Cooks moved in when I was in high school. I graduated from Herndon High School in 1970. So I was before you. Yeah. So we lived on the little farm, and when I was in 1st grade in Centerville Elementary, we bought a house that was on what is now the main runway of Dulles Airport.
Yeah.
And it was moved to our farm by truck, and it was a 3-bedroom house, which was good because my aunt and I had to share a bedroom. My dad was a washing machine and dryer repairman for Sears. My mom didn't work when we first moved to Centerville. We had a working farm. We had a cow named January, and we raised beef to eat. And I remember 2 of our steers were named Big Boy and Little Boy. And one night when my cousin, who was citified, was at dinner, I asked, "Are we eating Big Boy or Little Boy?" Which was not a thing that you ask city people. I found out after the dinner. So anyway, but we raised chickens, and we had a barn and a corn crib and a hog pen, and we raised little chickens to raise up to freeze, and we had a few setting hens. We had a huge garden. We had grapes and peaches and apples and pears So it was quite a working farm. And like I said, when I was in first grade, we moved that house to the farm. And that was great because I had Mrs. Foster in first grade, and she made us stand up every week and show and tell. And so I got to tell about my house moving down the road. And when it got to the intersection of Lee's Corner Road and Braddock Road, where the stream goes under Braddock Road right there, the moving permit ran out for the house. And so for several months, it sat on the trailer bed across the stream there. And finally, my dad's best friend, Harold Young, said, well, I've got the permit worked out. And they brought the house on and set it on its foundation at the farm. And we found out later that Harold had lied, that he hadn't really gotten the permit. We were just all tired of the house sitting in the stream, and we kept being afraid that there would be spring floods or something and they'd get up in the house. So he just took it upon himself to move the house. So anyway, and after it got almost completed, my mom and dad moved into it, and Sally and I stayed in the other house, and my grandparents, who lived in Annandale at the time, they moved into that house. And so then round about late spring, the house finally was finished enough that my aunt and I moved over there too. So my aunt and my mom and my dad, we lived in the new brick house that had come from Dulles. And my grandmother and grandfather lived in the farmhouse. So is that enough for right now, or is there something else I should say?
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
And,
That's great.
and your house was right where the main runway at Dulles Airport is now?
Yes, the house that they moved.
Oh.
And I can remember it sitting there. It was, we went over to see it to pick out which house we wanted from Dulles, because they sold several houses off of what's now Dulles Airport. If you get one of those picture books that they write about the different counties and towns and stuff in Virginia, there's one on Dulles Airport, and you can see a page of the pictures of the houses being moved. My house isn't one of them in those pictures, but yeah, and so I grew up in that house. And then in 1986, Mom finally had to sell the house to developers. We couldn't hold them off anymore.
Mhm.
And she moved into Sully Station. Yeah, so I spent all of my childhood in Centreville that I can remember, just about from 3 years old until I left for college. And then my mom lived there until she went into the assisted living. So, and my aunt too.
Still look.
Say that again, Linda.
I said, but your mom still stayed in the area. She was just down the road here on Lee Highway.
That's true. She moved to assisted living on Lee Highway, so she was close. So, but anyway, but I went to Centreville Elementary School, all 6 years of elementary school. Before that, my mom, when we first moved to Centreville, couldn't drive. And Sarah Young, who was one of our neighbors and good friends, worked at Melpar. So Mom got a job with Sarah at Melpar, and Sarah drove them. But when Sarah became pregnant with the last baby, she had to quit, and Mom had to learn how to drive. And I was along on some of those lessons, and it was quite interesting. I do not like to drive, and that might be one of the reasons, because I was along on those excursions. But anyway, my dad hired Jack Ashley, who was a teenager, and their house was on Braddock Road also, where the Ashleys lived, and it was across from the second Centreville United Methodist Church, where it used to be. And Mrs. Ashley kept me sometimes, but when I got to be kindergarten age, my parents took me to the Cardinal School for children, which was in Vienna. And I went there for kindergarten. And then I went 1 through 6 in Centreville Elementary. And then in intermediate school, they shipped us to Robert Frost. Then in 9th grade, I went to W.T. Woodson. And then sophomore through senior year, I went to Herndon. So I got to do a lot of homework on school buses because they shipped us all over the place then. So, and by the time I graduated from high school, the 60 little children that had been in 6th grade with me at Centreville Elementary School were spread across 4 high schools. That's how fast Fairfax County grew. Some of my friends graduated from Oakton, some remained at Woodson. I went to Herndon, and then Linda and some of them ended up going to Robinson. So
I ended up at Oakton. My younger siblings went to Robinson.
oh, okay,
Yeah, Bill and I went to Oakton, and that's where we graduated from.
right,
Well, Norma down and went to Robinson.
okay. So it was very interesting. We got spread out all over the place during when Centreville was exploding. So I can remember when Dulles Airport was built. I can remember when 66 was built. Mrs. Gardner was our bus driver, and many mornings she would have to wait before she could cross where they were building 66. Back then they didn't make temporary roads and stuff. They just had a gravel road through the middle of what's now 66 where Braddock Road went. And we just went across that old bumpy thing. And it was a blasting zone. So some mornings we just have to stop and wait for the blast to finish before we could go on to school. And it really irritated Mrs. Gardner because I think she had another run after us. So, you know, so that was something. And when I was in 3rd grade, I started going to Centreville United well, it was Centreville Methodist Church then. I had been going to Fairfax Methodist Church, but it was a long way. And a lot of my friends were going to Centreville. So I switched to Centreville Methodist Church. And when I was in elementary school, I belonged to the Brownies. And I can't believe they used to do this because they wouldn't do it today. But we would all line up at the school, us little children, you know, in the Brownies. And they allowed us to go out the front door of Centreville Elementary. It was never used. It was right beside the principal's office. And we would go out the front door and across the front lawn and down a little bank and across Braddock Road and across a vacant lot all by ourselves, marching. And the Brownie house was across from what was Centreville Firehouse then. So we would march through this vacant field and this vacant lot, and we'd end up in the side yard of the Brownie house. And we did that once a month. And I, you know, no adults, nobody with us. We just went. So anyway, are there any questions anybody wants to ask me?
Well, there was the Girl Scout house, because the older Girl Scouts met there as well, and the firehouse is still there.
Oh, is that still where it is? Well, that's
Yes.
good. By the time I got to Girl Scouts, Mrs. Hurst was the Girl Scout leader, and we met upstairs in the firehouse. I never got to be a Girl Scout in the so we always called it the Brownie house because we never got to be Girl Scouts in that house. So, but anyway.
Bonnie, it's Pete. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Braddock Road and Stone Road, were they paved when you all moved out there?
I can't remember it, but my mom told me before she died that when we first moved to Centreville, Braddock Road out our way was still gravel. Now, Stone Road was always gravel up until I got into high school. I think they paved it when I was in either 8th or 9th grade. And I always thought it was called Stone Road because it was made out of stone, but it turned out it was named after Ormond Stone too. So, so it wasn't named Stone because it was gravel.
That was a logical conclusion to draw, though.
Well, yeah, it was. And I was always a history person, so I was always very interested in the history of everything. So you know, I can remember when they in 1961, when they were having the reenactments of the Battle of Manassas, the Park Service actually let them have reenactments on the battlefields back then. And I could hear the booming of the cannons and everything. And I was still very confused about the Civil War. And I asked my mom, why were they fighting over this silver? Why couldn't somebody just divide the silver and get the whole war over with? So that's when I got my first lesson on what the Civil War was. I was a little confused about the purpose of the whole thing.
Civil, not silver. Mark has a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject. So I'm Mark Khosravi, and I just let see two of my very good friends showed up. Three, I see Christine, some people I haven't seen in a long time. Anyway, and Mike and Mel, I promise not to incriminate us in front of our parents and things like that. So I'll keep it clean. Bonnie, I came late. What's your last name, by the way?
My main name was Wood. My name is Garber now.
Okay. So off weird question. I saw you mention Melpar. Is that Melpar that used to be in Falls Church?
Yes, it's Raytheon now.
Yeah, I know. Because I lived in Centerville like 1970 to 74, 75, moved away to Falls Church for 3 years, right down the street from Melpar. Stayed there for 3 years, and then moved back to Centerville. But I used to go fishing that little creek that fed into that pond. That was always.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so that was like a favorite spot of mine. So it's kind of weird how that connection sort of fell into place.
Right.
Anyway,
But
I just want to say hi to Linnell and Mike. So anyway, and Mrs. Gregory and Christine, how you doing?
my mom worked there, and then my aunt, who lived with us, worked for the FBI. She was the night supervisor in ident for the FBI, and she left for work about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and got home at about 1 o'clock in the morning. So that was one reason we had to buy the new house, because when I started school, she was waking me up at 1 o'clock in the morning getting into bed, and I was waking her up at 6 or 6:30 getting ready to go to school. So it got to be quite a problem with just 2 bedrooms in the little farmhouse. So that's one reason we bought the house at Dulles and had it moved, because it was a 3-bedroom house. So.
Very interesting. I was hoping to have also